Everyone expected General Ibrahim Traoré to humiliate the fallen leader. After all, President Mahamadou Zita, 63, had once called Traoré a reckless soldier unfit for diplomacy. Now, with Zita locked in a crumbling jail on the outskirts of Niamey, the power dynamic had flipped. Guards whispered that Traoré was coming for revenge. But what happened next stunned even his closest advisors. Traoré walked into the cell, looked his enemy in the eye, and made him an offer, not a punishment, but a proposal that could reshape West Africa forever. The man they thought was a destroyer had come to build. If you believe in a stronger, united Africa, and stories that reveal the courage, vision, and leadership of figures like Ibrahim Traoré, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring untold stories to light and inspire a new generation of changemakers. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Together, let's keep the spirit of African resilience alive. They said he was going there to humiliate him. Whispers circled in the military corridors of Ouagadougou, predicting that Ibrahim Traoré would finally crush the man who once labeled him a danger to continental peace. Former President Mahamadou Zita, now disgraced and imprisoned, had been a vocal critic of Traoré's rise to power. He accused the young captain of recklessness, of staging coups for glory, and even threatened international legal action against him before the tables turned. Many expected Traoré to seek revenge, to make a public spectacle of the man who had tried to bury his name beneath ridicule and fear. But that was not what happened. When Traoré arrived at the crumbling prison facility on the edge of Niamey, his face bore no smirk of vengeance. His posture was not triumphant. The guards, confused by his quiet demeanor, stood aside as he walked alone into the dark chamber where Zita had been held. Inside, the former president sat upright, alert but bitter, prepared for mockery or worse. The silence between them crackled with years of political tension and personal insult. But instead of raising his voice, Traoré sat across from him and said 5 words that no one had expected: "I need your help, sir." Zita blinked, certain he had misheard. This was the same man he had once dismissed in international interviews. The same man he had warned foreign diplomats about. And yet, here he was, not with accusations, not with condemnation, but with a proposal. Traoré began outlining an ambitious project, a cross-border economic corridor along the southern edge of the Sahara. He called it a wall, but not one of division. It would be a wall of connection, a lifeline to unify agriculture, energy, and trade across multiple nations battered by poverty and division. Zita listened, stone-faced at first. But then Traoré said something that cracked his defenses. He reminded him of a speech Zita had once given in 2015, where he spoke of a future in which African leaders would set aside personal pride for collective progress. "I believed you back then," Traoré said. "I still want to." The sincerity in his voice cut deeper than any insult. There was no performance here, only purpose. In that dim prison room, roles reversed. The accused became the visionary. The prisoner, the mentor. Zita looked down, silent, for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, but his words were clear: "If you're serious, I'll help." No one outside the room would know what passed between them in that moment, but it was the beginning of something unprecedented, a collaboration born not of convenience, but of transformation. The man who was once seen as a reckless soldier had just shown the world what real leadership could look like. The news of Traoré's private meeting with Zita sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles across West Africa. Many speculated that it was a staged encounter for propaganda, a performance meant to paint Traoré as a forgiving hero. Critics argued that seeking counsel from a man once branded a failed leader could only lead to political instability. Some even whispered of betrayal, claiming Traoré was legitimizing a criminal. Others warned that engaging with Cite could jeopardize Burkina Faso's already fragile alliances. The misunderstandings multiplied rapidly, fueled by commentators who hadn't been in the room, who hadn't heard the calm in Traoré's voice or seen the clarity in his eyes. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, something rare was happening. Traoré arranged for Cite to be quietly moved to a secure compound, not as a prisoner, but as an advisor. Their collaboration began without fanfare. Traoré assigned him a small team of analysts and gave him access to regional development data. The first weeks were tense. Cite, still cautious, often challenged Traoré's vision, testing his commitment and political maturity. But Traoré didn't flinch. Instead of reacting defensively, he welcomed criticism, knowing that true progress only happens when pride is put aside. His goal was not to control Cite, but to engage him as a contributor, to build a plan that was both ambitious and grounded. One of their earliest debates centered around the route of the Sahara corridor. Cite insisted on involving local communities from Mali and Niger, regions often neglected in state-level decisions. Traoré agreed. It was the first major breakthrough. Together, they redesigned the blueprint, prioritizing regions most devastated by conflict and drought. The corridor would not only be a highway for goods, it would host water pipelines, solar farms, and small agricultural hubs. It would be a lifeline for families who had never seen a government project reach their village. As the plan developed, both men evolved. Traoré began to show more patience, more willingness to listen. Cite, once hardened by years of exile and incarceration, began to believe again. He saw in Traoré the idealism he had once carried, long buried under disappointment and defeat. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted from cautious formality to mutual respect. They weren't just planning infrastructure, they were rewriting the emotional and political fabric of their region. When word of their work finally leaked to the public, it sparked confusion and admiration in equal measure. Some people still didn't trust Cite. Others saw Traoré as too idealistic. But many more began to talk, about unity, about second chances, and about what it means for enemies to build together. The same continent that had long been fractured by pride and revenge was now watching two former adversaries shape a new kind of leadership, one rooted not in dominance, but in dignity. As the months passed, the collaboration between Traoré and Cite began yielding results that no one had predicted. Behind the scenes, their team developed one of the most comprehensive regional integration plans in modern West African history. Yet, outside the walls of the secure compound, doubt still festered. When the first public forum was announced, where both Traoré and Cite would present the Sahara Corridor Initiative together, international media responded with suspicion. Pundits accused Traoré of romanticizing reconciliation. Political opponents warned that legitimizing Cite might backfire, citing his past missteps and controversial exile. Some even called for legal proceedings, reigniting old accusations of treason and corruption. But once again, Traoré didn't flinch. The day of the forum, held in the capital of Ouagadougou, began under heavy tension. Protesters gathered outside the venue with banners denouncing Cite's presence. Rumors swirled that Traoré would back down at the last minute, cancel the joint appearance, or at least refuse to share the stage. But when the curtains opened, both men walked out side by side. There were no speeches of apology, no carefully rehearsed statements of forgiveness. Instead, Traoré began by acknowledging the pain and mistrust in the room. He looked directly into the crowd and said, "Rebuilding a region begins by rebuilding our ability to sit at the same table, even with those we once opposed." That single sentence shifted the energy in the hall. Cite then took the podium. Rather than defend himself, he focused entirely on the project. He laid out technical diagrams, regional maps, and community testimonials gathered during their planning. He never once asked for redemption. He asked only for belief, in the project, in the people, and in the future. Slowly, the audience began to listen, not to two men seeking validation, but to two leaders offering vision. The atmosphere, once cold and skeptical, turned contemplative. Journalists took notes. Community leaders nodded. For the first time in years, a room full of divided voices found a common frequency. After the presentation, the media shifted tone. Articles emerged titled, "A New Kind of Alliance," and, "From Cells to Blueprints, The Unlikely Revival." Traoré's move was no longer seen as naive. It was reframed as courageous. His willingness to rise above personal insult and political history was not just symbolic, it was practical. It got things moving. It showed that forgiveness, when paired with a strategic vision, could do more than just heal, it could build. And perhaps most importantly, it showed the people of Burkina Faso and Niger that enemies do not always have to remain enemies. That even in the shadow of betrayal, leaders can choose to see beyond labels, beyond scars, and into the work that still needs to be done. In a region long fractured by pride and silence, Traoré and Zita had offered something radical: cooperation without conditions. Long before the collaboration took root, Zita's name had been synonymous with division. Many still remembered how he had once labeled Traoré as a militant opportunist during a televised interview, urging international courts to consider intervention. That statement alone had earned him enemies across Burkina Faso, particularly among the younger military factions who viewed Traoré as a symbol of national renewal. When rumors began circulating that Traoré was not only speaking to Zita but also consulting him on matters of state, the backlash was immediate. Former allies questioned his judgment. Media outlets speculated about secret deals. His critics accused him of betraying the revolution. But Traoré remained focused. He understood something that most observers missed: power isn't just about punishing the past, it's about reshaping the future. The idea of bringing Zita into the fold wasn't about erasing history. It was about extracting value from it. No one knew the regional corridors better than Zita. His flawed presidency, though short-lived, had involved deep negotiations on transnational infrastructure. His exile, ironically, had sharpened his understanding of how global systems viewed Africa, as fractured, unstable, and reactionary. Traoré saw in him not a threat, but a flawed mapmaker holding parts of a route no one else could see. Their private conversations, now more regular and less tense, evolved into working sessions. Traoré often listened more than he spoke, absorbing lessons from Zita's failures. They debated openly, even fiercely, but with mutual intent, to build something bigger than themselves. One night, after a long session reviewing cross-border irrigation strategies, Zita paused and asked why Traoré had truly come to him. "Because I know what they did to you," Traoré answered. "And I know what they'll try to do to me. But if we stand alone, we fall alone." That simple declaration marked a turning point. The partnership was no longer just strategic, it became deeply human. Two men scarred by politics, hardened by betrayal, were beginning to trust each other. Zita began drafting policy memos under a pseudonym to avoid public backlash, while Traoré used his presidential platform to subtly introduce ideas they had refined together. What once would have been impossible, two political opponents working in sync, was becoming quietly, steadily real. Public perception began to shift once visible outcomes emerged. In border towns where conflict had decimated trade routes, temporary roads were repaired. Water access improved in drought-stricken villages. Local councils reported increased communication with national offices. And though no one publicly credited Zita, those close to the work knew the truth. It was the outcome of an unlikely alliance that began with insult, distrust, and legal threats, but matured into a model of pragmatic leadership. In a continent too often divided by history, Traore had chosen to rewrite it, not by ignoring the past, but by inviting it to sit at the planning table. And in doing so, he proved that reconciliation, when rooted in action, is not weakness, it is strategy in its highest form. When the first satellite images of the Sahara Corridor's construction reached international media, few believed it was real. A ribbon of cleared land slicing through dry, war-torn borders, it looked more like a dream than a policy. But on the ground, in regions once forgotten by their own governments, the change was visible. Dusty outposts in northern Burkina Faso and southern Mali began to buzz with unfamiliar energy. Workers arrived. Temporary clinics were set up. Local elders were invited to planning sessions. Something profound was happening, and it had started in a prison cell with two men the world thought would never speak again. Zita, once dismissed as politically toxic, had become the ghostwriter of a regional renaissance. His name never appeared on the official documents, and his presence was never announced at press briefings. But inside the Presidential Planning Committee, his hand was unmistakable. He understood the geography, the tribal tensions, the fragile alliances that could make or break the corridor. And Traore, young but perceptive, shielded Zita from the political fallout while using his ideas to fuel visible change. It was a delicate balance, one that required silence, humility, and a kind of trust rarely seen in African politics. The breakthrough came when a violent flashpoint erupted near a key trade route in Niger. Rebel groups, long ignored by central authorities, clashed with security forces over disputed land access. In the past, such a conflict would have escalated into months of instability. But this time, something was different. Traore didn't send more troops, he sent negotiators armed with maps and economic incentives. The team presented a development plan that addressed the rebels' core grievances. Surprisingly, Zita had helped design that response, using insights from his own failures with tribal leaders nearly a decade ago. Within weeks, the rebels laid down their arms and agreed to allow the corridor's expansion through their territory. The event was hailed by observers as a miracle of diplomacy. But those closest to the situation knew it was something deeper, the result of listening to the past, learning from mistakes, and refusing to repeat cycles of violence. This was the hidden triumph of Traore's leadership, not just the infrastructure or the diplomacy, but the quiet decision to transform betrayal into cooperation. What began with public humiliation and legal threats evolved into one of the most unique political strategies in the region's history. No one had expected Ibrahim Traoré to turn a former enemy into a silent architect of progress. But by doing so, he redefined what it meant to lead, not by erasing scars, but by building with them. In the end, the real wall built across the Sahara wasn't made of concrete or steel. It was made of trust, risk, and the radical belief that even those once labeled enemies could help carve a new path forward. And that belief, bold and vulnerable, became Traoré's most powerful legacy. Here is an 800-word reflection on the lesson drawn from the story of Traoré and Zita, written in full paragraphs and declarative sentences. Leadership is often defined by moments of power, victory, and command. But in the case of Ibrahim Traoré, leadership revealed itself through an act of radical humility. Choosing to collaborate with someone who once labeled him a national threat. The story of Traoré and Mahamadou Zita is not simply about political maneuvering or regional development. It is about a deeper truth, that true strength lies in the ability to forgive, to listen, and to build with those who once stood in opposition. One of the greatest lessons this story teaches is that misunderstanding and insult are not final chapters, they can be the beginning of transformation. Zita's past was riddled with accusations, failed policies, and public statements that attacked Traoré's legitimacy. In most political contexts, that would have been the end of the conversation. But Traoré looked past the humiliation. He understood that Zita's words had been spoken in a different time, under different pressures. Instead of responding with retaliation, he responded with purpose. That choice, to rise above offense and seek common ground, is a lesson in maturity that many leaders, both old and young, still struggle to embrace. Another key lesson is that the past, even when painful, holds valuable experience. Zida's political career had ended in disgrace, but it was not without merit. He had knowledge about the region, its fractures, its needs. He had made mistakes, yes, but he had also learned from them. Traore saw this and made a rare decision, to use what was still useful. It's a powerful reminder that failure does not erase wisdom. In a world that often dismisses those who fall from grace, this story teaches us to look again, to separate failure from uselessness, and to reclaim experience when it serves the greater good. The story also offers a lesson in listening. Traore did not bring Zida in as a puppet or symbol, he listened. He debated. He questioned. And, crucially, he accepted criticism. That openness is the foundation of progress. Leadership that does not allow dissent becomes dictatorship. By allowing space for honest disagreement, Traore not only improved his own strategy but also restored a measure of dignity to Zida. It's a mutual lesson in how dialogue, when free of ego, can become the engine of innovation. Trust, in this case, was not handed out blindly. It was built over time, tested through long nights of planning, private debates, and shared silence. And this teaches us yet another lesson, that reconciliation is not a press release. It is a process. The world saw the results, a growing corridor, peaceful negotiations, cross-border development, but they did not see the effort it took to get there. Trust is not declared, it is earned. And it is often earned not in grand moments, but in the slow, difficult grind of consistency and cooperation. This story also holds a mirror to society. It challenges the way we view enemies, critics, and rivals. It asks us, what would happen if, instead of silencing those who oppose us, we tried to understand them? What new possibilities would emerge if we stopped seeking victory over others and started seeking victory with others? Traore did not lose power by engaging Zida. On the contrary, he expanded it, because he expanded the circle of people working toward the same goal. That is the essence of visionary leadership. On a broader level, this story reminds us that African leadership is evolving. Too often, the continent's narrative has been dominated by coups, betrayals, and cycles of vengeance. But here, we see something different. A young leader, rather than repeat the mistakes of the past, chose a new path, one marked by inclusion, not exclusion. The wall they began to build across the Sahara was not just physical, it was symbolic. It represented a protection, connection, and rebirth. The lesson is not just for presidents or politicians. It is for all of us. In our personal lives, we often carry grudges, avoid difficult conversations, or assume people cannot change. But this story shows that healing is possible when we confront the uncomfortable and embrace the unexpected. The moment Traore walked into Zida's cell and asked for help, he broke a cycle. He proved that history doesn't have to repeat, it can be rewritten. And that rewriting begins when someone dares to forgive without forgetting, to trust without surrendering, and to lead without dominating. In the end, leadership is not about who speaks loudest, but who builds the strongest bridges. Traore built one, not out of steel or stone, but out of trust, dialogue, and unexpected courage. That is the lesson we must remember. Reconciliation is not weakness, but wisdom in its most difficult form. And in choosing it, we do not lose power, we reshape the world.